Hello and welcome to the Sociology Staffroom. I'm Duncan Hall, unusually, not Katie Tyler, but I'm joined by Katie Tyler to talk to us today about the possibility of changing topics and specifically taking on the topic culture and identity. So that's an interesting proposition. Obviously, 90-odd% of AQA students do families and households as their paper one topic in the A level. And the next most popular, but it's still quite niche, is culture and identity. So, Katie, you've made that swap. When did you do it and why was that?
So I've made it up this year, but I have taught it previously. So I sort of like it's not a complete. I'm doing it for the first time. So I taught that pre 2016, and I think pre like spec changes basically. And I really, really enjoyed it. But I think with all the change and thing, I went back into sort of a bit of a comfort zone, and it worked for the staff at the time that we stuck with families, and there was a lot more resources out there for that,
Yeah.
obviously. So I thought, we've had like a sort of couple of years under our belt now, and I sort of wanted to go have a bit of a change really. So I've changed to culture and identity this year, and I'm really, really enjoying it. I think the students are. So yeah, I've sort of just started teaching it now because I've made the change in September, but I haven't still started teaching it until like February this year. So
Okay.
again,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's start with the positives. So, why do culture and identity web other than for a change? What's good about it? Why is it a topic that you might want to do?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I sort of thought about it, it's been in my head for a while, is obviously those people that teach GCSE sociology. And I know there's pros and cons for it on carrying on with family. But part of the reason was, although, it's not, like I said, it's good because if they do culture and identity, it's change. And I think
Yeah.
if they do it GCSE, it just feels a bit samey. So that's one of the reasons. But I understand why people would want to still with family because it cements their knowledge and then they can build the evaluation skills. But one is obviously to keep that engagement into A level from GCSE. The second reason is it's very synoptic in nature. So I feel that although there are a few sort of things that are particular to cultural identity, a lot of that will be taught in your other units, whatever, whether it be core units or your option units. There's a lot of synopticity within that.
Yeah.
There's a third. The third reason is I feel like it's really contemporary. So I think where it is repetitive in its sort of synopticity of the concepts, I think where you can apply contemporary examples in, I feel like it's a lot more student friendly in that point. Very Gen Z, okay, like it's very contemporary. And so I feel like you've got that student engagement there from that point of view. I also like the fact that it teaches stuff that we don't really teach in other topics as much. Maybe you do in health, like with disability, but that's taught, and sexuality, which I think we don't really sort of carve out any sort
No.
of exploration into sexuality.
Little bit in the media. But very much specifically about media representations rather than anything beyond that.
Yeah, so I quite like that. There's sort of those 4 or 5 different reasons there. So yeah, I think it's for me, it's a win-win on so many different angles, and the students seem to really like it, which is obviously really important. Is that buy-in from students? I made the decision to teach it rather than they did, but for
Yeah.
actually weirdly, and I know we're not talking about that now, but for year 13, I actually put it to the vote and said to the students, I took one thing out that I didn't want to teach just because it's not where my specialist area is. I just felt a bit like out of my comfort zone, but I gave them the choice to which unit I wanted to teach. So I think that's also important is that student
What
engagement.
have they chosen? Interesting. Just
The stratification for year 13,
stratification
which
for
I
year 13.
understand again if you don't like it at GCSE and then you've got it into year 13, but
Yeah.
they seem to like it, so
Yeah. Yeah.
they've taken that on. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Again, very synoptic. The reason I was sort of asking was I know quite a lot of people who do cultural identity tend to do media as well. That those two kind of support each other a little. So I was interested from that point of view. I mean, from the point of view of being synoptic across the whole spec, cultural identity and stratification seem like a good choice. I suppose that brings us to obviously 90-odd% of people do families, and there are reasons why they do. So I suppose some of them are sort of historical reasons, but I think you mentioned resources and things like that. So what are some of the challenges to changing to culture and identity?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't as many resources out there. Like, obviously, you've got chapters in textbooks, whatever you use, whether that be the tutor two ones, you've got your obviously topic companions, you've got chapters within, obviously, the big sort of publishers as well. So they're there, but as in anything extra, there isn't. I think if you would sort of outsource or get resources from like other teachers who teach or other communities, wherever it is, there just isn't the same volume because, as you said, there's not less of them. If you've got 90% of the students taking it, there isn't those things made. So it's things like knowledge organisers, or even like sort of exam questions, people aren't sort of sharing them. And then from a moderation point of view, you haven't got as many people that are able to moderate with you. So you are restricted on the resources end. But then on the sort of payoff for that is, because it is synoptic, there are stuff you can take from other topics and apply that across. So I mentioned like socialisation. Obviously, socialisation is taught in education and in religion, and obviously in media and in education. So actually, those things you can take across and put them across them, and then use your contemporary examples in there. So it's a lot of the names there's only a few names that I would say are only like culture and identity names. The rest of them actually, your studies, are from your other units. So there's a lot more, which I've talked about on other times, is like your value for money names. There are so much value for money names in cultural identity that you use from other topics. There's only a few in there that maybe talk about sexuality and disability, that are particular to that unit. Or like, I'm thinking Cooley maybe, when you talk about...
Well, that's it. Yeah, I was going to say, if you've got a question on interactionism or social action theory in paper 3 as your theory type essay, there's a lot in from point of view of where students would bring that information from. They're a little bit limited from some of the more popular options. You got Becker and Cohen and a few things there, but there's a lot more names that you probably just introduce in a theory lesson, like Cooley and Goffman and things that you do a bit more on in culture and identity. So that's quite handy from that point of view, isn't it, if you've got that sort of a theory question?
Yeah, and also postmodernity. I was thinking like postmodernism is a really big theory in there. So you've got your interactions, obviously, you mentioned Goffman and Mead as well. You can use and Cooley. So they're a bit more particular to that unit, I think, and obviously your postmodernists as well. So there's a lot more emphasis on those theories. So I think it helps with that sort of theory and methods element to it. So I think what it lacks in sort of resources, I think it's just been a bit more imaginative of where you can get that from pre-existing. And I think there is a growing sort of discussion about people wanting to do it, and I think you can source out people that will moderate with you, whether that be online or something like that, other teachers. I know that that's how I've done it. So see, where you'd normally like moderate maybe with people that are local to you, you probably could source that out through the online community as well.
Yeah. I was interested because you were saying that it was very contemporary, and obviously issues to do with identity and culture are very current and contemporary. But obviously the spec itself was written several years ago now, and some of the issues that we might talk about have become more prominent since, or things that we discuss more now. How do you keep it current while not deviating too far from the specification? Is that a challenge?
I think more the challenge is about sensitivity. I think that's the biggest one. So like, I think an element of deviation always happens in sociology, whether you teach education, media, and I think as long as you don't, I think there's actually, for me, I think there's a bigger problem with that sometimes for students as a teacher with the media topic. I think they think they know what new media is, whatever, and it ends up becoming a discussion around, they end up sort of answering the question, either describing TikTok, Instagram, whatever it is,
or what was on the telly last night,
or what was on TV last night, rather than apply it to theory. Whereas I think with cultural identity, because it is already sort of quite abstract, they don't tend to apply it to things that are concrete in that way, where they're just writing real life examples. I think the bigger issue is the sensitivity nature of it, and that's something that I'm very mindful of spotlighting. So obviously I've just started talking about socialization and ethnicity and identity, and just really mindful of that, and just being conscious that the examples are broad enough but also applicable. A lot of planning goes into it. It isn't just like I just put an example
Yeah.
and go, that just works. Because I'm conscious of the students I have in my class. I'm conscious of
Mm.
where they are in their own sort of
Yeah.
journey, and also what I'm exposing the students to, because obviously that balanced view as well.
Hmm.
So I'm sort of mindful of that. I try and sort of make sure everything's vetted before well, not make sure, I'm vet everything before it goes in. So I think the
Yeah.
bigger issue is, rather than going off on a tangent and making it a bit descriptive, is making sure that it's mindful of where the students are and the sensitivity around their own sort of experiences and knowledge, and sort of
Hmm.
making sure that it's always through the lens of theory,
Yeah.
rather than, so like we're talking about national identity and ethnic
Yeah.
identity. Obviously, if you do it through the lens of theory rather than this is what I think or something, it's making sure that it's done in a very balanced and professional manner.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I don't necessarily want us to go down a tangent of this right now, but I was thinking something like maybe sort of trans identity, for example, which isn't specifically mentioned on the specification, but obviously if you're talking about gender, keeping it contemporary, it's likely to be included. That huge sensitivities around that potentially. So quite.
And making sure that I'm using research, it's not just like, oh, whoever on TikTok who's talking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've spoken to a variety of sociologists around this in regards to gender and education and looking at transgender identity.
Yeah.
So there is research that's coming out, and making sure that it's reputable sociologists, as long as it's it's not like someone, like I said, off TikTok that just talking. I'm not saying people off TikTok are, but
No, but yeah,
it's making sure it's that,
academic.
and
It's academic,
and it's through that lens. It's research based, and the same with sort of looking at. I mean, obviously at the moment we can't negate the fact that we're talking about sort of recent migration laws in the UK. It seems it's appropriate to bring that into the lesson, but then again looking at it through the lens of academic theory rather than. Students will want to express their views, and that's what's great about sociology. It allows them to do that, but also being mindful that it isn't a place to sort of just go, well, this is what I think. Do you know what I mean? And being sensitive to that, because ultimately, and get sensitive to the news that you're watching as well. I think as long as we're making sure that we sort of keep it academic, and not to be mindful of what the news and what they're seeing, because I think the news that I'm watching is very different from the news they're watching as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I suppose be mindful of the fact that there'll be a range of views within the group, and that they might feel symbolically annihilated or whatever sometimes if their view is being sort of othered or presented as being the wrong the wrong one. It's yeah. So I mean, on that basis, would you say that it's although there's lots of positives for doing it, that it's quite challenging, and that requires a certain skill set that
I mean, I was
that you
thinking about
have,
this.
and that,
No,
I'm not sorry. I'm
I was thinking if you were if you're new to teaching, I suppose if you're an ECT or you're in that like first year teaching, unless your degree has a big emphasis on you're looked at culture and identity, for argument's sake, because of the amount of resources that are already available for families, for argument's sake, and I was thinking for the year like beliefs potentially, I would really, because obviously the year 2 stuff, I would personally maybe not to go on everyone do culture and identity like that. I'm just sharing my experience, and that bearing in mind I've been teaching for nearly 20 years, so it's not I think if you are learning your pedagogy, learning your craft, then it makes sense to look at stuff that's already out there, because obviously there's so many different things to manage. It's the fact that you haven't got as many resources out there. You've got the sensitivity of the subject and the topic nature, the sort of abstract nature of it. So there isn't that sort of, which is the bit I actually like. I like all those sort of grey areas, but it's not like you could do a column with like agree, disagree, and that's it, and we're done and dusted. No. Not suggesting the other units can, but there's also those. You've got to have sort of a bit of know where the spec's going in like the bigger picture in order to teach it, whereas if you're sort of in your first year of teaching, second year of teaching, you're still learning your craft, still understanding the spec inside out, that maybe you don't know what's going to happen in like the second year in January, for argument's sake. So it's hard to see that bigger picture potentially.
Yeah. How do I'm deviating massively from our script that we have, but how do the
We haven't got a
lower
script.
well,
I gave you some questions.
our suggested questions. How do lower ability students find it? Do they? Because obviously you're talking about these grey areas and the complexities and things of it.
Really good question.
Do they struggle with it, or is it as
It's
accessible as some of
interesting.
the other units?
So I've taught in two environments at the moment, and this is where I am working in a grammar school.
Yeah.
So potentially you could argue, that they may be high ability students.
Yeah.
I say that, like,
Yeah,
obviously,
I mean, I guess A level
yeah.
students
That's-
are all selective, aren't they? They've all they've all had to pass a certain amount of
Well, this is
GCSEs
what
or
I was
whatever
about to
get them.
say. At the end of the day, with passing your GCSEs and getting onto A level courses, arguably the students are able to access the material. I have taught it in a non-selective school, and the students did really well in that unit as well. So my sort of going back full circle, I think I actually think personally that actually it's better for mixed ability students because of the fact that it's the revision element to it. They're not learning something new. Like, as much as I like the family unit, there was quite a lot to sort of cover. I'm not disliking the family unit, but there is a lot to cover. So you've got the policies, you've got demography, you've got gender, like there's lots of like that bits, and they're all, and some of them are synoptic and some of them are like standalone, and they're all, got childhood in there as well, and so there's quite a lot to cover from a knowledge, then a synopticity point of view, whereas cultural identity will just fit nicely into stuff that you've already taught socialisation, you've already taught theories, you've already talked probably a little bit about identity. The only thing that I suppose is different would be things like mass culture. But obviously, if you cover media, then you would have covered that anyhow. Popular culture, you weirdly would have already taught global culture without even realising it through globalisation. So a lot of that, you go, oh my goodness, what's global culture?
And again, really synoptic stuff that's useful.
Yeah, and the same with subcultures. So subcultures will come in education, and it will come up in crime. So actually, there's only a handful of stuff that's just particular, as I said earlier, to culture and identity. So actually, I think all ability students, I think the key thing is scaffolding. So if you have got low ability students or students that struggle maybe with literacy, then we ensure that scaffold is in for those students, and then obviously they're adaptive learning for them. But yeah.
The flip of that, just out of interest, I remember several years ago there was a culture and identity 10 marker, and I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of it was bringing together consumption with identity, I think was the sort of outline and explained 10 marker. And I remember that the same year, the families one, it was really complex, and you had to think about how policies linked to the family, and then how that changed family. It was like there was a real sort of process to it. And the cultural identity one, you were basically getting into the mid band with goths buy black clothes. I'm probably I'm probably exaggerating slightly, but
I think you might be slightly. I'm thinking where you're going with this. I'm going to let you talk, and I'll see where you're going with this.
So I mean, in all of sociology, we get things where people do kind of common sense type answers that you might have potentially have been able to come up with without having done the course, and you'll get some marks for doing it. I mean, parts of cultural identity you could arguably say perhaps
I let you say it.
feel a bit, perhaps feel a bit more like general studies or something like that, where you could, if you're someone who's quite, is interested in what's going on in society and is aware of stuff, that you could probably, obviously you wouldn't have any of the theory, you wouldn't be talking about all of that, but say, how does consumption help with, link to impact on popular culture? I mean, fashion and food and I think maybe it was subcultures, maybe it was consumption and subcultures.
Yeah, I mean,
that might have been it. I'm trying to think. There was definitely one where goths bought black clothes, but and obviously they had to kind of make that link. But ultimately it was quite compared with
Well, I think it's simple
perhaps,
because of the fact the kids, and this is what goes back to the buying from the students, they're living that. With sometimes with the family stuff, you're talking about stuff, and they're like, it doesn't affect them because they're not parents and they're not living. Whereas if my demographic were mature learners, then that might be different. Whereas I think sometimes we do stuff in the family and they're like gender roles, like, or they might be talking about, and they might see stuff play out in their family, or they're talking about, you know, demographic changes or policies, but there isn't that same. Whereas I think because of the world they're accessing, like consumption, and you know, I won't mention brands because obviously I don't want to forget. So there's certain brands where they can obviously see where that commodity fetishism is taking place. It's a lot easier because they're living that, and they sort of go
that drink.
Yeah, we could be talking about that drink. We could be talking about that drink, or we could be talking about a pair of shoes. Actually, they were telling me about a pair of shoes. Right. Oh, they're back in fashion again, are they? And so they can see it a bit more because they're, and also the fast pace of it as well, because obviously the way that social media works, and even the point that they've seen things that like what's hot in 2022 is not hot in 2023. It's like what was hot in 2021?
I mean,
do you know what I mean? They're part of that life. Whereas I think when you look at sometimes the family unit, they aren't experiencing every aspect of the family. So when you're talking about it, they're sort of learning twice. One, the sociology, but also what you said was the common sense bit. Isn't actually common sense for them because they're like, I don't know, I don't really know what you're talking about because of their family setup or whatever.
Similarly, I suppose culture and identity does have some old stuff in it, which might seem, you know, like every module does, but I mean, perhaps the stuff on mass culture feels, you know, pretty dated. I mean, even, you know, obviously you can make lovely applications with, you know, Mead and Cooley and Goffman, but it was all a long time ago now. So do you find that they want to talk about TikTok and not about how waiters presented themselves in everyday life, according to Goffman?
I think, I mean, but then I suppose it's the same for like when
it's the same as other topics.
So I was thinking about like Bourdieu, and obviously I showed them what which was talking about France in like the 1800s or whatever it is, and obviously I get them to the modern day example of like he's talking about picnics and baguettes and cheese or whatever, and like he was plotting them in that matrix. And so again, remember in sociology, it's the application rather than the knowledge. So, I mean, the careful thing, and I've spoken about this before, is Bourdieu or Goffman isn't talking about TikTok. And so it's a concept that we use to understand. So we have to remind students of that. But like the same you have to do with other topics like education or whatever it is. I think you've got to be careful of how they apply it and making sure they're applying it across rather than going... You're talking about Instagram or whatever, or Alphazer or Cooley or so on. So but I think some of those concepts, because the nature of them being so grey, I don't like use that word because it sounds like a negative, but so like, you know, they're not like, I don't know, the way they say it feels so concrete in the same way that other theories do. I think they sort of can apply that quite well, and they can see it. I think I mentioned earlier on another podcast that we talked about was there's like a comedy I was watching yesterday with a comedian called Mae Martin. And I've literally
I know from Taskmaster. I don't know. I don't know their other work, but I do know them from Taskmaster.
I can take their work, and there's like segments from that which has been said, and I can apply that to like a 1 minute bit of the sociology lesson because they've explained certain aspects of sociology in such a succinct way that the students can then access that information. And isn't that our job? Isn't that our job of sociology teachers, is to give the students the tools to access that abstract theory and the concrete world and to make an understanding of it and then to engage them into this sociological imagination. So there you go. Done.
That sounds great. I had another question, but I feel like that summed it up nicely. And my next question was going to be like a little bit negative and mithering compared with that really positive ending. Shall I try it quickly and we can cut it out if we want to? So it was going to be, that all sounds amazing and brilliant and the students really engaged with it. Then you get to the summer and it might be evaluate the usefulness of functionalist ideas about socialisation or something like that. And it's like... Do
you know what? There was again. obviously everyone teaches different examples, but I was flicking through some, and there was one, and I'm going to get it the wrong way round, but I feel there was a paper once that literally just had none of the culture element, and it was just all about identity. It was all identity, and I was like, because I was saying to the students, you've got to revise everything. You've got to revise everything. You just don't know what's going to come up. And they went, well, what about this paper? Do they do 1 year identity and 1 year culture? I said, no, it doesn't work like that. It just so happens. So, but that isn't that true again for all the topics? You can like revise it, and then they just pick that one bit, and that's why we can't guess what's going to come from the exam paper, because you could spend 3 months studying all these great things in crime and deviance, and actually they just ask you questions on something relatively quite small, like I can't think, class or something,
Marxist views of
yeah.
Well,
you'd love that though, Duncan, wouldn't you?
I would, but you're right. Then all the stuff you'd learnt about I don't know, crime prevention or whatever would seem that you couldn't bring it in, which is, as
but you can sometimes. You
can sometimes, but it's the same with every topic. I was just thinking that if you were correctly making it seem very contemporary and lively and stuff, and the question won't always support the but that's, as I say, that's true of all of it. And you could, and part of your evaluation could be that bring in the more contemporary stuff, couldn't it? Yeah.
And I was going to say, as a quick thing as well, it could be the contemporary stuff, I was thinking, and this is almost a different podcast, which we actually are going to have a podcast about with another guest, is that balance between, are we teaching for the exam or the love of learning? And so actually, yes, you might not be assessed on it, but actually, it's that love of learning as well. So
and the integrity of the subject. It's not just about. At the moment, obviously, probably at the forefront of people's minds is the 3 exams that are coming up. But absolutely, a lot more than that. Definitely. Anyway, it sounds really good. I think if I were teaching it now,
well, that's a good question. Go and do it.
I'm not 100% sure, because I love global development, but I think I'd possibly do culture and identity and stratification if it were me now.
Why?
Well, the first reason rather goes against the marvellous point that you just made, then it's not all about the exam, which is they've got to include these sort of synoptic connections throughout anyway, and culture and identity and stratification and differentiation are big parts of those synoptic links, so I just feel like they would support their learning of everything else so much better. I genuinely don't think you'd have to teach much separate theory if you've taught culture and identity and stratification. I think that would cover most sociological theory. Just need to bring it a bit more into methods, for example. So that would be one reason. But also, I suppose, with stratification differentiation, you got your Marx Weber key points. With culture and identity, you could bring in your nice interactionist stuff and postmodernist stuff, and I feel like they've learnt quite a lot of sociology then, whereas sometimes you might feel that they're learning a lot of really interesting stuff, but it's perhaps a little narrower if they go on to do sociology at university. They might have everyone will have gaps, and obviously some people go on, and I did a sociology degree without having done sociology A levels, and lots of people do that. So lots of people go into university without having heard of Cooley or whatever, but it's good if you have done. Those my 2 reasons.
I don't think I did it, though I did it at A level. I don't think I did it. It was actually recent. Look at my book. I'm looking at this is one of my first. When you get these little readers, and I love it. I literally love it because it was my first. Maybe that's why I teach it, because it's one of my first things I got taught. And I remember doing Alfred Schutz. Did I said it correctly or not? Oh, I don't know. I'm not very good with the old name. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to me. And there's it's just some really. I can't even find it now. Oh, look. Class status and passing Max Weber there.
Well,
and I love this book. I love it because it's just like, it just reminds me of that. Yeah. Some of the core themes, I think sometimes, as much as we critique the theory, sometimes we do need the old school theories as well. We understand it's like it's
the building blocks, isn't it?
It's the building blocks, definitely.
Absolutely.
So, but
Similarly, in my first year at university, I had Laurie Taylor. I think I've said this before, but I had Laurie Taylor, and he did the kind of but I think it was under the heading of social psychology at the time. But it was the kind of a lot of the interactionist and type content, and as a result, like Goffman's like burnt into my brain in a way that
and also, it sounds a
functionalism
bit.
isn't.
Well, also it's a little bit cooler, isn't it? I mean, coolie, not cooler, rather than coolie. Like, as in, like when you learn about it, like you think of all the other studies, and then you hear about like the jazz music scene, and it's all like, oh wow, like this is interesting. It's just a bit more. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that's what I thought when I took sociology at degree level. First of all, it sounds a bit more like exciting.
Yeah, and I think the slightly abstract nature of it is quite engaging, isn't it? If you want to be engaged by it, I can see how it might put some people off if they're basically just wanting some lists to learn. but the slightly sort of more slightly more philosophical aspect of it is quite engaging, isn't it? It feels similarly about some of the Marxist ideas, actually. But it's quite challenged. So you want to be sort of challenged by ideas, don't you, rather than it just be
Oh, I love it. I love being confused. I've this concept that one day when I ever write a book, it'd be comfortable with confusion. Like I literally feel more confused now than I did when I was like, show my age, but 1996 when I took sociology for the first time. I thought I thought I was going to say, what did I think? I was going to change the world and going to be out there, Marxist, triple system feminist. That was it. It was all sorted. And then as obviously you get older, everything becomes a lot greyer. But I like being confused. I quite like not having all the answers, and I like that feeling. So I suppose it goes back to what you're saying. It's what you feel comfortable with teaching as well. So
yeah. So I was just going to mention as well, we've got that, just because you mentioned about the sensitive nature of some of the content, we have got that free CPD course from TTU about teaching sensitive topics and sensitive and controversial topics. And I guess that might be useful if you were going to have a go with culture and identity, because there are definitely some sensitive and controversial topics in there. And there is, I think it's probably one where you do want to make sure you've put some thought into that, and you're not just finding the textbook and this is how it is sort of thing. You want to have thought this is sensitive.
And also, do you know what I quite like about it? I'm keep on talking, don't I? Do you know what I also like about it? Is that things have changed so much I haven't taught it for ages. So like, for example, thinking about the word gender, and I remember teaching this, like obviously I've taught gender for ages, but as in culture, from a cultural identity perspective, and I think it was quite nice. I haven't taught it probably for a good 10 years, and I remember like the concept of, although it obviously existed, the world of like non-binary, there wasn't the language, and now there is, and I love the fact that sociology has progressed so much. I feel that that's another side bit to it. I'm like, wow, like we have, sometimes you feel like there hasn't been much social change, and then you teach something and you think, oh my gosh, that actually has. Like, I remember when like same-sex marriages became legalised in the UK, and now obviously you're 10 years on from that, and you're like, wow, like how was that even a debate? Like, and so I think there's another beauty of it is that actually you can see the social change that's happened, and obviously as well. So that was it really.
And I think there is, I suppose the sort of flip side of it is that there's the risk that you teach it based on perhaps the norms and values of 20 years ago or whenever it was that we kind of had our fixed ideas about some of these issues, and that we don't sort of address kind of where the kids are. You were saying about quite often on some of these questions about identity and things, they're ahead of they're teaching you in a way. I think we had this conversation before that they're seeing things on TikTok and concepts that we're not particularly familiar with, but they're very much engaging with on a sort of daily basis, and it'd be easy to ignore that, I think, and easy to ignore recent social change. Sort of there to be a kind of year zero when the textbook was published, or whatever it might be.
Anyhow, we'll leave us with that. But yeah, good to talk. Good to talk.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's been really interesting. Yes, I probably would do culture and identity. I think no, partly I think because I'm just a little bit bored of families.
I didn't say that, by the way. I didn't say that.
I don't mean my own family. I don't mean my own family. I also like work, poverty, and welfare, but that might be a discussion for another time. Maybe we could get someone else in to discuss the benefits or otherwise of work, poverty, and welfare. I probably wouldn't do health, but I can see why some people do. It's quite interesting.
I wouldn't, just because I don't feel like I know enough about it. Not because I never actually have ever, even at university, when you pick up modules, I don't even took a health module. So I feel like I'd do a disservice maybe to it.
It's something I've taught when I've taught on sort of health and social care type courses, and we've done the sociology of health and social care, so I'm kind of familiar with quite a lot of it, and it's quite interesting. But I think it's one where it's a good one to do where perhaps you've got students who are interested in going into that field or whatever. But work, poverty and welfare is interesting because that and stratification, I suppose, are the most political, and I quite like my political sociology. But no, I'd be tempted to do cultural identity if I were offering it now.
There we go.
On that note, thank you very much, Katie.
Thank you.
It's been very interesting. And
thank you.
Yeah, and I'll see you soon. All right.
Yeah, definitely got some exciting podcast book, by the way. I just wanted to say that as well. So watch your space.
Seeing that looks really good. What's coming up? All right. Cheers, Katie.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.